But yeah, I think it's just loving our people well and not judging for the decisions that they make
Yes.
regarding this COVID pandemic and how we social distance and the issues of masking and vaccinations.
Tala, welcome to Dealing Hope. Thank you for joining me in this conversation with Pastor Tala Toaetolu. Tala has been a nurse and served as a nurse for 20 years. She now serves as a pastor in Los Angeles and has brought her service to the whole person as a nurse into her ministry as a pastor, serving again the fullness of who we are as people, and particularly God's calling on us into the harvest, into the mission, his mission, and what that looks like. I'm sure you will be blessed as well with Pastor Tala Toaetolu. Hello, welcome to Dealing Hope. So good to see you again. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you, Eddie. We are well. Thank God. Yes.
Well, it's a privilege for us to have someone from your part of the world and where you're serving there in California to join with us today. But let me go back in history, not too far back, but in your former life, you are a nurse, a registered nurse, and you've worked in that space for many years. Do you miss it?
I do. I did nursing for over 20 years, and there's a lot of things I miss about nursing. And there's some things I don't miss about nursing too. I miss the patient care. I
Mm,
really do miss the bedside care. I miss the learning, the science. I miss the working together. I miss seeing people come in broken
yeah.
and leave healed.
Mm,
So that
mm.
aspect of nursing I really miss.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have such high admiration and respect for nurses. I could never do that. And I really do take my hat off to those of you who serve in that important ministry, and especially in the time that we're in, very much on the front line of dealing with people who have COVID. And we'll talk a bit about that later. You're a pastor now, and you've been serving for a number of years. And let me just bridge that question about nursing and pastoral work. What do you find you have brought from your nursing life into your pastoral life and leading churches and people in the community?
Um, I find that there's so many similarities. I
Okay.
talked about all the things that I loved about nursing. The learning, the science, the teamwork, working together and seeing broken people made whole or at least have healing. And I find that that's what I brought into pastoral ministry too. And to me, it's so similar in so many ways because you're working on the holistic person.
Yes.
And even though pastoring, sometimes we think, oh, pastoring is preaching, maybe teaching, but I see that even especially during this time where people are hurting, there's a lot of loss, they're dealing with isolation. So I find that what I brought from nursing being nurturing, caring, just seeing the person for the whole being
Mm,
is what I
mm,
really appreciated about nursing. That there's spiritual brokenness too,
yeah.
and we can see that
Yes.
with the gospel there's healing. So there's just a lot of similarities between the two professions.
It really is quite intimate, the nursing profession and your relationship with the patient. And I like what you're saying about the attending to the whole person and being able to come close to a person, and really it's beyond the physical very much. Yeah. Let me uh, ask you about um, training to be a pastor and then being a pastor. I've often heard it said, "Oh, it's so different from the classroom." to what it's actually like um, in the workspace, being a pastor. So your training was at last year university. Is there anything that has carried over from you into the actual practicing, doing of ministry?
Yes. Again, similarities of nursing and pastoral care. So you learn theoretically, in the classroom, and sometimes you get into your actual practice. And I find that, oh, they didn't teach us about all the little paper cuts along the way, the little losses, the little, how you interact with people, all the different personalities
Mm,
um, that you
mm,
come across. But what I did get from La Sierra, and I really appreciate about my studies there at La Sierra, is that my one of my courses that I took was in theology, and I spent a whole year. And one of the books that we read for a whole year was Faith Seeking Understanding by
yes,
Daniel Migliori. And
yes.
so, I went into school because I was a prodigal daughter, and I just came back to the Lord a years before that, and went into ministry. But I went into La Sierra thinking, like the old, God said it, I believe it, and it settles it for me. And then I realized I came out of La Sierra, faith seeking understanding meant God said it, I believe it, I'm still wrestling with it, you
Mm,
know? And
mm,
so then I took that in my pastoral ministry. I have a lot of young people or other, friends or church members that are wrestling with certain issues, and I realize it's our faith and we continue to seek understanding, but that does not mean we cannot have a robust relationship with Jesus. We can,
love.
back and forth with God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so attractive, the idea that maybe it can be just really, really simple. It's just black and white, and there are no wrinkles. And if we can get to that point of understanding and just really, it's like we often say, we listen to understand. We don't just listen to let you have your voice and then I'll tell you what I think. It's always much deeper than that. I'd love to hear some of the application around that when it comes to how you've tried to lead in this COVID season, and maybe even trying to build teams, work with teams. What has worked? What hasn't worked for you?
Sure. It's been a real difficult season with the pandemic and COVID. And I've just come in as a full time leader at our Ukaipa Samoan
Mhm,
church.
mhm,
So that's a new experience for me. I've
mhm.
helped out in different areas in our Samoan work, but to be the full, pastor for the church, um, I've realized that when we're dealing with COVID and this pandemic, our people are they're community. They're a communal
Yes.
type of our culture is communal,
Mm,
and so with dealing with COVID, I find that people will do what they see. So I've had to deal with the consistency of sending out information. So I have a young elder who works with me. He does a lot of our information, sends it on to our church via either Facebook or text. And then we have the deaconess that keeps the social distancing in our church. But what I find sometimes is our church members just want to see
mm.
how the leaders are going to handle this. So we have social distancing right now. We're still required to wear masks in our
Okay.
churches.
Okay.
And sometimes, I'll walk in and maybe some of our church members won't be masked. I won't say anything, but I'll just wear my mask, and then I'll see they'll just,
Yeah.
wear our masks. So, but yeah, I think it's just loving our people well and not judging for the decisions that they make
Yes.
regarding this COVID pandemic and how we social distance and the issues of masking and vaccination.
You've mentioned, and we're talking here about Samoan Church, Pacific churches, and you're pastoring a Samoan church. I'm interested to hear your thoughts of someone who has lived in the US and Hawaii, Samoan origins, and where does the Samoan church or the ethnic church sit in 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 the way we do church right now? Is there a need for change? Is there consideration for shifts? How do you see it? Because, as you say, very strong in community, and that has got to be one of the benefits. Something we've always talked about and encouraged in the wider church. Oh, we need to have small groups. We need to fellowship. We need to, and we set up these opportunities so that people can come together. Whereas in ethnic churches, that is so rich in just how it's done. Yeah, interested in your observations because you're up close to how that's looking, what the future might hold.
Absolutely. That's such a great question. It's something I'm still grappling with and observing in my church. We do community so well. We do generosity so well. We love
Mm,
well. We love being within our ethnic group. I've observed that. I went to a conference done by the 2% in August, and we talked about how our church or Pacifica churches can be of a benefit to others. And it's because of that. We're a community,
mm,
especially in this day and age of when there's just such individualism,
mm,
and people keep to themselves. There's a rise in anxiety, suicide, medications that deal with anxiety, loneliness, and all of those. And what I find in our community is you won't find people in our community hungry.
mm,
You won't find them, without friends or family around them. But what I also find, which was really enlightening with one of my young people that I took up to this conference, he said, while we're inclusive as a community, we're also exclusive because we keep to ourselves.
okay.
To me, that was really mind blowing,
Mm,
because we
mm,
do community very well,
mm.
but we do it within the
Yes.
confines of our own people. So while we have a lot to offer, which is generosity, community, love, and being around people, there's also, I think, and I'm coming into this church and it hasn't been a year yet. And our community of Samoans, there's pockets of, Adventists and different other denominations, and we tend to stay within those denominations, and we tend to stay within our cultural ethnicity.
Mm,
Um, so the challenge, I think, for me is we have all this good stuff to share with outside ethnicities, especially in our church. I'm thinking, look at our neighbors. There's no Samoans living within, I don't know if it's like 5 miles of our community. So, how are we going to get new people to our church if we're just going to stick with our Samoan ethnicity? So, coming up this week, too, I'm going to meet with one of our English churches up the road, and we're just
okay.
going to share how we can work together. And when I brought it up to one of my young people, we're going to get together with the English church up there and see how we can work together. There was just kind of a pensive look on their face, like, I wonder how that's going to go. So it's going to be interesting, but I think there's a lot we can offer um, people outside of our own ethnicity. And I'm excited about maybe there might be a shift, that it's a Samoan church will speak Samoan, but there'll also be multicultural, within
Mm,
our
mm,
church.
mm. I love your willingness to take on that challenge because that can't be easy. And possibly the reason for not wanting to associate freely and openly with others is that, just that sense of, well, it's comfortable, or, well, what will they think of us? and and so I, I I think it's a great expression, really, of the gospel commission to just stretch out and realize, it's the gospel to the whole world, and that there is a responsibility, um, for an ethnic church, for a Samoan church, a Tongan church, a Polish church, whoever, to not be ghettos, but to also see a responsibility to the country that has welcomed you and has become your new home, to be a witness in that new place, to share with them as well. So I wish you all the best. And I love that story about the young person going, oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's been great. I sometimes think we operate in silos,
Mm.
in our churches. So the challenge is how do we get out of those silos and be inclusive and work together because we'll get further working together. So yeah.
That's really interesting. I think we could go for a long time down this particular track, because it's fascinating how in the um, countries that have multiple uh, ethnicities coming to those countries, residing in those countries, becoming established, and then setting up their churches. And so these churches are all in these different language groups. And so, yeah, and there are many benefits to that. But then at the same time, as you've, I believe, highly highlighted today, rightly highlighted, is that, look, is that how it's supposed to be, you know, until Jesus comes? Or are we to move towards what it will be like when we are all together in heaven, hopefully not in our silos? Um, yeah. Let me come back then. Boy, I'd love to go down that track, but maybe do that another time, and we'll get some others around the table with us. Let me come back to this COVID situation, because you were sharing with me earlier, before we started the conversation here, that in some of these cases where people have passed away, um, there are those who didn't believe in masking, wearing masks, didn't believe in vaccinations, and they have passed away. And so, have you grappled with leading in this situation where we do need to respect and treat equitably those who don't want to vaccinate or wear masks, as well as those who do? How have you found that? What are you learning?
Um, being a nurse, from past experience, just in vaccinations, you realize, oh, we've got vaccines for measles and smallpox and polio, and those have worked. So you've got your own individual set of ideas, and then yet you come to people who are divided about the way they think. And so I've come to the how to deal with my church members or anybody actually, around me is um, that I respect their decisions. I provide information, but also just having an open conversation with
Mm,
them on their beliefs. And
mm,
so, it's just providing information. And then if they don't believe either way, it's still talking about social distancing,
mm,
and the safety, but truly respecting their decision. And I think this two words that come up for me is like love. How do we love well
mm, mm,
during these situations? And so loving well means you can accept people's decision, whether to vax or not, to mask or not, but in the conversation and in the information shared between people, that there's no judgment, that people can then make up the decision, whichever way they go.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's just conversation and information, and to just really love our people well.
Yes, yes.
There's some people that have gotten up, that have really taught, and I think this is a hard one too for me, Pastor Eddie, is when people get up and say they're not masking because this is God's will. So,
Mm,
though that's really tough on me to sit and hear that, and then realize I also have to respond to that, you know,
yeah,
because
thank
it's
you.
not God's will for us to die. It's not God's will for us to be ill. And so we have to take all these different precautions, whether you vax or you don't, we
Mm,
still have to take precautions so that you don't get yourself in a state where then there's death or illness that impacts your family and community. So I think
yeah,
just loving well,
yeah,
conversation, information.
yes. Such practical advice and so doable. And again, that really does connect with what you were saying earlier about seeking to understand. And
Yeah.
so that conversation and that relationship, people's story gives us insights into why our motives and why we do things. Let me just ask you a question in closing that I've found myself asking fairly regularly now, because it's one that people who join in with Dealing Hope are typically leaders and are wanting to understand from another leader what their experience is. And the question is very simple: how do you lead yourself? And so, yeah, any tips for us? What's your journey like?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think it's just one of these things that you have to realize, if you can't lead yourself, then you can't lead others. And I've found that leading myself means that I have to be kind to myself. In a world where we're comparing our leadership maybe with other leaders, or there's a guy that I read, which is Pete Scazzaro, and he does this a book, or I read his article where the I think it's the grace of limitation, the
Mm,
just loving what it means to stay within your own limitations.
mm,
And so what I found, the best way to lead myself is to actually have Sabbaths outside of my Sabbath,
yes.
the seventh day Sabbath. Sabbaths for me is so busy. I pastor or share with people, and I get all the energy from people asking questions or issues. And so I've realized I take Sabbaths, whether it's with my husband every fifth weekend of the month now. We've made that intentional. I will say no to any invitations on those fifth Sabbaths.
Mm,
And I've also made another day. But I think um, basically it comes down to just time with God. Time with God every day, and just trying not to be so hard on myself. All the things that we're trying to give for other people, loving, patience, kindness, is something that I need to receive myself and treat myself that way too. So
oh,
that's how I'm leading myself, Pastor Eddie.
thank you so much. Thank you so much. That is a real gift, what you have shared from your journey to us. And you, Pastor Tala, have always been a gift to me. And I thank you for joining me in Dealing Hope, and also the love and blessings you've always extended to me, to Tessa, and our family here. God bless you, and love to your church, and also to Bennett, and also your parents. Thank you so much for joining Dealing Hope today.
Thank you so much, Pastor Eddie. God bless.